Welcome to Excel 2013 Statistics video number 1. Hey, if you want to download this workbook and follow along, click on the link below the video. Hey, this is the first video in my Excel 2013 Statistics class at Highline Community College. And this first video is an introduction to Excel. So we're actually going to study Excel before we even jump into Chapter 1 in the textbook. Now, we're going to be using Excel 2013, the textbook, and all the videos are using 2013. And really, there's some dramatically different things in 2013, especially the charting that's totally different than earlier versions. Now, here's the topics for this video. And we're going to start off by clicking on the sheet Excel Layout. Now, we're going to start with the basics of Excel first. And the most basic thing is, look, we have letters at the top of each column and numbers at the head of each row. So when I click in cell D16, that cell is named D16 because there's a D representing the column and a 16 representing a row. Now, that seems silly and simple, but it's so fundamental. Everything we do, formulas, functions, charts, pivot tables, will be based on cell references. Now, that's D16. If I click over here, that's F5. I can even look up in the name box. And if you hover your cursor, you can see it tells you, oh, yeah, that's the name box. You can even click in the name box, type A3, and enter, and your cursor jumps to A3. So the cell is the most basic unit. Now, all the cells together make up the worksheet. Down here, we can see it says Excel Layout. That's the Sheet tab. Later, when you do your homework from the textbook, you actually will have to create a new workbook and name your sheets. Naming sheets easy. You simply double-click. Double-click. Now, I double-click this. I'm going to type, what is Excel, and enter. That's how easy it is to name your sheets. Now, here, we're on Excel Layout. So we got column, row, then we have cell, then we have all the cells, then we have a sheet name, which gives us the name of the worksheet. All of the worksheets together, and you can see I'm clicking, clicking, clicking. All of the worksheets together make up the file or the workbook file. Up here in the title bar, we can see the actual name. This is a .xlx. We will also have .xlsm. These are workbook files. So cell, all the cells, worksheet, sheet tab, all of the sheet tabs and all the worksheets together make up the workbook. Now, let's talk a little bit about navigating. There's a horizontal scroll bar. You can click or arrow over with your little scroll arrow, drag horizontally back. There's also a vertical scroll bar. Click and drag. If you have the cell D16 selected, or whatever cell, if you use the wheel on your mouse, you can scroll down. I'm using the wheel to scroll up and down. Now, in the workbook files for each chapter, there's going to be many, sometimes 20, 30, 40, 50 sheets. So we need to talk about navigating through these sheets. Now, one way is to use the arrow. And if you're familiar with Excel, there used to be an arrow here with a line that says jump all the way to the end. That's gone. So we need to talk about this. Now, watch this. The sheet Excel Layout is selected. But if I use the arrow, it just moves the sheet. It actually doesn't move the active sheet. Now I can click the other direction, right? You could see the sheet is still selected. So I want to look at something different. There's a keyboard control, page down or page up. So I'm going to hold Control, and the page down, page up are right by the home and end above the arrow keys. All of those keys are going to be very important in this class because we're going to be dealing with a lot of data. Now, I'm going to hold Control and page down. And now look what happens. I not only move the sheets, but the active sheet moves. And watch this. See, enter data. Now when I Control page down, oh, now it shows me more sheets exposed underneath. Now I can go the other direction. Control page up. So that's one way to conveniently move. Now, how do we get all the way to the end since the little line and the triangle is gone? You actually hover, and it reminds you you have to Control and left click. So I'm going to Control and left click. Wow, it shows me the last one. It doesn't jump there. Now I'm going to Control and click to show the very first sheet. Now here's the coolest trick in 2013. I'm going to come to these arrows and right click, and no way, a whole list of all the sheets. So that probably is going to become very important. Here we have maybe 25 or 30 sheets. Later we'll have a lot more. Now check this out. If I want to see the homework problem, I click on homework 3 and click OK, and instantly not only do the sheets move, but the active sheet moves. So that's pretty convenient there. All right, now I'm going to right click, and oh, it pops right up. Come to the very top, click on topics, and click OK. Now I'm going to take my mouse. All right, so that's a little bit of navigating. Now we want to talk about the ribbons. Now if I click, the ribbon shows up. If I click it again, it hides. I'm going to right click, and there's the collapse ribbon. So if I uncheck this, now the ribbons will show all the times. We will be getting lots of features like fill color and font size, number formatting. We'll go over to the insert. We'll have to use insert pivot table a lot, or insert chart. Page layout, we're not going to really do much with that, but we will do a little bit. Formulas, we'll definitely do some stuff with that. Data, we'll do some stuff with that. I'm going to click back on home, right click, check to collapse. That way you have a little bit more room. Another thing is this is my quick access toolbar, which I have customized. Yours shows up at the top maybe with a save, an undo, and a redo. If you want to modify the quick access toolbar, if you want to modify yours, you can right click and show access toolbar above the ribbon. That's where yours shows up. If you want to add your own buttons, like I want to add underline, you come to any button in the ribbon and right click, and it says add to quick access toolbar. You got to be kidding me. So I can go get my favorite things. There's formula evaluator, right click, add to quick access toolbar. How cool is that? Right click, show quick access toolbar below the ribbon, escape. The ribbon was actually hiding the quat there for a second, so I clicked escape. All right, so we have the ribbon. We have the quick access toolbar, or quat. That's where we go and click to get our features. We saw the basic of how a spreadsheet is laid out. Now we want to go to the next sheet tab. What is Excel? And actually, I'm going to double click that and type what Excel does. Notice I typed it out, and now I hit Enter, and now that sheet has that name, because this sheet is about what Excel does. It does 4 basic things. The first thing is it stores raw data. Now this data set is world famous. All raw data that is analyzed is stored in this form. Field names at the top, or column header names. They just say, hey, the date has to go in this column, sales has to go in this column, sales rep in this column. And then we have individual transactions or records or observations in rows. We'll talk more about this proper data set in a little bit, but we store raw data in Excel. And what do we do once we have the raw data? Well, the 2 main things that Excel does is make calculations and perform data analysis. Now, calculations, and we'll see how to do formulas later in this video. We can do something like a formula with the sum function to add a column. We can use the average to calculate the average, or as we'll learn in this class, the mean. We can even use multiple functions together to calculate max and min, to calculate the range. Now, those are just built-in functions. Just in a couple minutes in this video, I'll show you all sorts of other formulas that make calculations. So calculations is one of the main things we do in Excel. The other thing is data analysis. Now, data analysis, statistical analysis, financial analysis, they're all doing one basic thing: converting raw data into useful information for decision making. Here's the raw data. One thing we can use is we can use the pivot table feature to quickly go from a column filled with sales rep and then get an individual listing of each unique name, the sales rep, and the total from raw data into useful information. How is this useful information? Because now we can compare. If the hurdle was $45,000 for getting a bonus, we can clearly see that only Joe got the bonus. Another way we can go from raw data to useful information for decision making is using a formula. Here we had to type these unique dates out, but we look through this column, then summarize the sales based on the date. Here we used the sum ifs function. We also can do things like data visualization, not only with conditional formatting, making a cell chart. Obviously, the longest yellow bar indicates the biggest number. Or we can make charts. Now here, sales rep, we can clearly say 1, 2, 3. We're visually articulating quantitative data. That means the numbers here, and we can quickly see that the green one is the biggest. All of these things here, pivot table, charts, formulas, going from raw data, creating useful information. Now, we'll see how to do all the basics of these things in this video. But next, we need to talk about data types. Because get it, we're going to start by talking about raw data. Then we're going to look at formulas, pivot tables, and charts. But if we don't know all the characteristics of our raw data before we start, then we get into trouble. So let's go over to the sheet, data types. Here are the data types that we're going to see in Excel. Text, numbers, logical values, truths and falses, errors, and empty cell isn't really a data type. But it is going to be important to understand empty cells because they will have an effect on formulas, pivot tables, charts. Now, let's just do an example. I'm going to type a word, right? Because the first data type is text. I'm going to type Excel. Now, I'm going to use the Enter key to put this in and push my cursor down. But watch which direction text is aligned. It is to the left, always to the left. Numbers, I'm going to type 43, and watch this. I'm going to hit Enter. 43. Whoa, it's aligned to the right. That's the default behavior. By the way, I have my speak cells on Enter. I should turn them off. Immediately when you put something in Excel and it is aligned, the default to the left, you know it's text. Immediately when it's aligned by default to the right, you know that it is a number. Hey, what about Boolean values? That's the fancy word for truths or falses or logicals. Notice I didn't capitalize, but when I hit Enter, always logical values, truths and falses will be capitalized and center. Here's another type of data. It's not really a type of data, but it is something in a cell that will affect formulas and pivot tables. If we do a formula like 1 divided by 0, hey, we're going to get an error because we're not allowed to divide by 0, or it's undefined. That's an error. Empty cell, it's just there's nothing in it. Now, stats are fun. It's definitely aligned to the left. 450, aligned to the right. False, notice I didn't capitalize, always centered in the middle. Equals a number plus a text. You can't do that. How do you add the letters S, A, T? That should be stats. How do you add these letters to this number here? It's not possible in math, so you get a value error. This should say stats, because stats are fun. Now, I immediately want to point out why it's so important, the default alignment. And the main two ones we will see are text and numbers. Let's just look at these numbers here, OK? We're going to come down here and do our very first formula. Equals SUM tab. Then I'm going to take my cursor and click. You see the dancing ants are dancing around, but I'm clicking. And don't be scared if you accidentally click the wrong cell. It's in edit mode until you hit Enter. So if I click and now highlight by dragging, whoa, I went too far. No. Just don't let go. When you got the right ones, then you can Control Enter to put that formula in the cell and keep the cell selected. I can see up here in the formula bar, that is our first formula. But notice it gives me an answer down here. Now let's try this over here. Equals sum. And I'm going to highlight the range. So far it's looking good. Control Enter because I want to put it in the cell and keep the cell selected. Whoa. Look at that, 0. I could see the formula up there. Why? Because these are text values. And it's so important in our data era. When you're given data, lots of times from databases, data will be exported. It looks like a number, but it's exported as text. Guess what? Our formula won't be able to add that with the sum function. In this class, we will see data that is improperly stored, not as a number, but as text, and then it's useless to us. So we need to immediately recognize when it's aligned to the left, It's our visual cue that there's something wrong with the data. Over here, our visual cue was to the right, so we knew it was going to work. Now, we've got to be careful. Watch this. This is why you never want to use alignment in Excel. And most spreadsheets in the world, I have to tell you, do something silly like this with their number. You center. As soon as you force alignment away from the default alignment, you lose your visual cue. Control Z. Now, what's Control Z? Control Z is undo. Now, normally there's a button, right? Escape. I don't even have that button here because in this class, we're going to use keyboards. We're going to have to use undo so many times. What a hassle it is to go up and click the little blue back arrow. Control Z is the keyboard. All right. So numbers to the right, text to the left. Now, here's what you don't want to do. And again, really, if you go out and look at spreadsheets in the working world, some huge proportion or percentage of them do this. They take all their numbers and they center them. The problem is it may look good, but immediately lose your visual cues for whether Excel thinks it's a number or text. And there's a problem here. I'm going to Control Z to undo that. Notice this column, dates are numbers, right? Immediately, this is a typing error. Someone accidentally put 37 days. As soon as you type this and it aligns to the left, it's your visual cue that you made a mistake. As soon as I delete the 7 and hit Enter, my visual cue, alignment to the right, that's a number, it tells me that it's correct. As soon as I mistype this and hit Enter and it aligns this way, you're like, oh, I made a mistake. So, I mean, that's by design. That's to the very beginning of spreadsheets. Visual cue, Enter. We can already see there's trouble here. If I was to use the sum function to add these up, I would get 92, right? I immediately have a visual cue. That is text. So again, when we highlight, and many of you probably have seen this in your job and go to Alignment Center, you lose your visual cues. Control Z. All right, so types of data, text, numbers, logicals, errors, and even empty cells. Now, let's go over to the sheet, and I'm going to use my little arrow here to scroll over a little bit and click on Data Sets. All right, so if our goal with data analysis is to go from raw data to useful information for decision making, we have to keep our raw data in a certain form. Now, raw data, or simply data, we've all heard these terms thrown around. Raw data or data just means the individual little piece. This is the date. Individual little piece. This is the sales amount. Individual sales rep. That's the sales rep name. So all the little TD individual pieces make no sense until we organize them and create useful information. But all of the tools we use in Excel and throughout the world depend on the raw data being kept in a proper data set. A proper data set. Here are 5 characteristics of a proper data set. You have to have in the first row of the data set field names or column headers or variables. Those are all synonyms, and I have some notes over here. Those are all synonyms, and you'll hear it all over the place. Database people call them field names. Scientists like to call them variables. The reason that we have to have field names or variables in the first row is you have to say what kind of data goes in this column. We're only allowed to put date in this column. Only allowed to put sales in this column. Only allowed to put sales reps. Rule number 1, field names in the first row. Rule number 2 is that the first column has to have a unique list of items. It's called in databasing a primary key. You also use the term element. We're collecting information about this transaction. It happened on this date for this amount from this sales rep. The first column contains a unique identifier. If you, as a student, think about your student ID, that's the unique identifier in the student table at your university or college. Your student ID would be here, and then all the information about you and grades would be in subsequent columns. The idea is there's no duplicates in this first column. So when we collect data for transaction 12570, we don't mix it up with any other transaction. Imagine at your school, if you had your student ID in the first column. Imagine if you had your ID down here for someone else. That means they'd be mixing up your grades with someone else's grades. So unique identifier, no duplicates in the first column, called a primary key. And the primary key contains elements. All right, so field names in the first row. Primary key is the first column with containing elements we're collecting raw data about. The third thing is each row is a record or a transaction or an observation. Those are all synonyms. This is the collection or observation for transaction 12572. The fourth thing, and this is important in Excel, is you have to have empty cells all the way around the data set, or row headers. These are row headers, 17, 18, 19. Or if this was touching up here, that you could have column headers. The reason why, as soon as you put a piece of data here, which sometimes people do, they put like a note about this transaction. Boom, that becomes part of the data set. When you sort it, when you do a pivot table and other data analysis features, it will mess things up. And the final thing is that you don't want to delete any empty field names. You also want to try to not have any empty cells, which means a bit of raw data is missing. Sometimes in the working world, the way data is stored, sometimes that does happen. That's what we're talking about, understanding an empty cell. Sometimes will mess things up. Control Z. You also obviously don't want to have an entire empty row or an entire empty column, because then it disconnects the data set, right? This bit of raw data and field names up here is disconnected from down here and over here. I'm going to Control Z, Z. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Every data set is going to have to be like that. Now, there is one exception to that, and it is, and we'll go down here. Many data sets do not have a primary key or list of unique elements, and it's no problem. All the other rules still have to apply. Field name in the first row, empty cells all the way around, records in rows, and then no empty cells or columns or rows. The reason why this is perfectly all right, and even in our textbook, which defines a proper data set as always having a primary key or a list of unique elements, even though our textbook defines it that way, we will see data sets in our textbook that come like this. And it's no problem, because once we summarize it, and we'll see just in a few minutes in this video how to do this with a pivot table or formulas. Once we do that and get a unique list from here, boom, of our products, and then add them all up, boom, to get our useful information, this becomes a proper data set. So that second rule about primary key and unique list of elements is not always true. But the rest of them have to be true in order to perform pivot tables, sorting, and other data analysis features. All right, now, here's our second example. Does it meet all of the rules for our proper data set? You bet. Field names in the first row. Looks like there's a unique list of elements. Records in rows. No empty cells. Boom. Here we have stock names. There's the date. There's the number of employees, the net incomes, and earnings per shares on that particular date. A third example. Oh, here's our student ID, right? Here's the class, the quarter. Here's the testing information. So this would look like my grade book, right? If I'm not going to mix up your grades, I better have a unique identifier, either your name or student ID. So proper data set, proper data set. And even our example right here, this is a proper data set for using our data analysis features, but it doesn't have a primary key or unique identifier. Now we want to go over to the next sheet and talk about entering data. So I'm going to click on entering data. Now I have two simple problems like you might see in the textbook or on the test. And we have to figure out what is going to be required when you enter the data in the worksheet and complete the problem doing your calculations or whatever. Let's read this first one. Problem 12. If the grades for the class were these, what was the class average or mean? All right, so the very first thing is I'm going to label everything properly. Problem number 12. I like to do formatting. I'm actually going to right click and uncollapse this. So we could go, I have built my quat here for all of my favorite buttons, but just in case you don't have that there, I'm going to use the features up here. So we can, I'm going to add some yellow, and I'm going to add an all border. All right, now, this looks like a data set. So I'm going to say grades. And I'm going to format this. I'm going to use some dark blue. And I'll show you two methods or techniques for formatting. I like to add color and stuff like that. That, guess what? That's the field name or variable or column header. And now I enter the raw data. 2.9, enter. 3.2, enter. 1.9, enter. 3.8, enter. Now I don't even remember. 2.5, 2.5, enter. Now this row is too tall, so I'm going to point between 17 and 18 and double click. All right, now I'm going to add some borders here. And guess what? That's a proper data set. Now here, we're not going to use pivot tables or anything like that that are dependent on that. But guess what? Now when you come and look at this, you know exactly what these are. Now, our goal was to calculate the average. So you have to put a label. And I'm going to, in parentheses, say mean, because when we get to chapter 3, we'll learn that what we learned in grammar school as an average in statistics is called a mean. And what is it? We add them all up and divide by the count. Well, luckily, we don't have to do it longhand. We can do a formula. Equal sign starts any formula. And then I'm going to type AVER. And when I see average selected in blue, I hit tab. I'm simply going to, with my mouse, click on the first one. And there's my dancing ants, and drag until I get the right number of cells. And then Ctrl Enter. Now, I want to definitely add some formatting. And I got to show you a cool trick. I already did font white, fill, blue, and border around this. So I'm going to right click. Oh, the mini toolbar has fill and font color and border. That's pretty cool. But it also has the paintbrush, which is copy the formatting only. So boop, I click it. Notice I'm not clicking, but look at my cursor. It's a thick white cursor with a black shadow with a little paintbrush. Now be careful. Wherever you click, boom, that applies the formatting. Now, I'm going to very carefully, in every spreadsheet I ever make and show you in the video, and cells I expect on a test to be have a formula, I'm always going to add some formatting. And I'm going to go down to more colors. And in the standard color, there's custom and standard. I'm going to select the old accounting spreadsheet before there were spreadsheets, paper green, and click OK. So anytime you see a cell like that, it means that that's a formula. Now, even out in the working world, sometimes this is handy because notice this is raw data. I didn't add any formatting there. I put my field names or my labels in this formatting here, and I clearly delineate. Because when I'm over here, if there wasn't any green there, I don't know if it was typed in or a formula. So I'm using formatting to help me to understand, yes, that's a formula. Yes, this is raw data. Now, when I highlight this and I want to copy it, I'm going to use keyboards. Control-C. You can right-click or come up here if you want. But Control-C to copy. Now, when you copy, that's copying the content. There's some text there. There's some numbers here. There's a formula. There's fill. There's font color. So when I come down here and Control-V is the keyboard for paste, whoa, it actually pasted everything. Now, I'm going to show you another cool trick. Home, over here to the editing, there's an eraser. And you can erase just the formatting. I'm going to click on this. All would remove everything, the content and formatting. I'm just going to remove the formatting because I got to show you two schools of thought on formatting. Now, Control B or bold, either Control B or bold up here. And I'm going to make this the minimal school of formatting. I am going to add a color there. This is kind of the minimal school of formatting. If you're out there in the working world, you'll see that people do formatting like this a little bit more elaborate. But the minimal school says, hey, why do you think they invented those gray lines? I don't need to add a border. Why do you think we have bold? I don't need to add all this color. So this would be like the minimal formatting. That's the kind of formatting I'm going to do. Now we'll talk about Excel's golden rule here, because here it is. If a formula input can change, put it into a cell and refer to it in a formula with a cell reference. Now what does that mean? That's what this is right here. Notice I'm referring to the raw data. These are called formula inputs with a cell reference. Now this is a range of cells that says A21 to A25. That is the reason I do that. And the original idea for spreadsheets from Bricklin and Frankston back in 1979 VisiCalc was if you mistyped your data, this wasn't 2.9, it was actually 2.7. Now watch this before I hit enter. Watch over here. Boom, instantly everything updates. Why? Because we did a formula with cell references that pointed to the raw data. Now I'm going to Control Z. All right, so that's the first part of Excel's golden rule. The second part, and we haven't seen this yet, is if the data will not change like 24 hours in a day or 12 months in a year, you can type that into a formula, and we'll see that later in this class. And part of the golden rule, always label your formula inputs. And that's what we did. We either used some elaborate formatting or the minimal formatting. We're also following the rule of formatting the cells with our formula. Now, problem number 13, if the total cars sold for the month was 75 and 15 Fords were sold, what proportion of the cars sold were Fords? Well, the first thing is I want to put my problem number, but I got to show you a great trick. Control C, remember it copies content and formatting. Control V, and I'm going to hit the F2 key to put it in edit mode. F2 always puts in edit mode and keeps the cursor at the end. And watch this, backspace 3. So even if I put it in edit mode and changed a little bit of the text, that'd be probably faster than typing it out and adding all of the formatting. Now, here's what we never want to do. I'm actually going to put a label, which is part 3 of the golden rule. I'm going to say, I didn't put a good label because it doesn't say what kind of proportion is. And here is violating the rules to the nth degree. I'm going to say equals 15 divided by 75. I am violating the rule. I'm hard coding formula inputs into the formula. Control Enter. Well, yeah, it does give me the answer. I can see this up here, but there's a huge problem. Well, we already know if I needed to change these, and if I'm over here, I'm looking at this, I'm like, what is that? But even if I had to change this, it's easier if there was a label. When I look up here, I don't know what that 15 is. I don't know what that 75 is. But there's a bigger problem, and I want to scroll down here. Research throughout spreadsheet history has shown that embedding variable formula inputs in formulas, hard coding, is one of the main contributors to faulty spreadsheets. And there's a couple studies done in history, but here's a great one right after the financial crisis. If you want to click on this and go, it talks all about this being one of the main problems. Now, this is just one cell, but imagine an entire spreadsheet filled with formulas like this and no labels. So that's not going to work. We're going to come up here and type this out correctly. So I've entered my labels and my numbers. Now I've got to show you a great trick. We're going to use right-click mini toolbar and that paintbrush again. But before we did it on one cell, watch this. As long as when I click, I don't let go of it, I can click and I'm holding and I'm dragging. And when I let go, now all 3 cells get that formatting. Now, I'm going to go ahead and highlight all these. Right-click and check that out. Mini toolbar, all borders. All right, now right-click And it looks like the bucket is already that color, so I can simply click and boom. Now let's do our formula. An equal sign starts all formula. Now I can go ahead and click with my mouse, but if the cells are close, use your arrow keys on the navigation board. So I'm going to use my up arrow to get the 15. That's the forward sold for the month. Then I'm going to use division. That's /, and then up arrow to get the 75. So there we have our proportion or division, 15 divided by 75. And I'm going to use Ctrl Enter to put the formula in the cell and keep the cell selected. I can see my answer right there. Up here I can see the actual formula. Now, if I change the inputs, it wasn't 75, it was 80. Instantly, the formula updates. Now I'm going to Control Z to undo that. So that's how we're going to enter data. When we read a problem, we're going to put formula inputs in the cell, label everything, do some sort of formatting, make our formulas pointing to the formula inputs. We never want to see equals 15 divided by 75. If you do this on a test, you get 0. Why? Because we don't want to be one of those statistics about faulty spreadsheets. All right. Now we're going to go over to our next sheet. Even though we've done a few formulas here, we want to now go over and talk a little bit more about formulas. I'm going to click on formulas. Now we have a bunch of examples here, but I also have some notes. So formulas, well, we can do things like add a column of sales, calculate an average, add with one condition. We'll see examples of all of those in this sheet here. Here's a list of the different things that can go into a formula. And we'll see an example of all of these on this spreadsheet here. But of course, we start with equal signs. We can have cell references in formulas, math operators, numbers if the number won't change, like 12 months, built-in functions like sum, average, sum ifs, comparative operators like greater than or less than, even the join symbol, and sometimes we have text. All right, that's just a list. So you can come back and refer to this later. Here's the order of operations, or our math operations. You should already know the math order operation from the math prereq for this class. Parentheses, exponents are carets, multiplication, division, plus, and subtraction. Here's our comparative operators, and we will see comparative operators throughout our class. There's the join symbol. Here's the full list of how Excel calculates formulas. The full list is here for you as a reference. As we run through our examples, we will see examples of all of this. All right, now let's go scroll to the top of the sheet. I'm actually in the E column, so I use my horizontal bar. And we want to use this as our first transaction data set. And we're going to see about 15 examples of formulas. Now, the first one here is we want to add this column of sales. Now, we typed it out before equals SUM, but I got to show you two things. One is adding a column is the most common calculation in Excel. So what do you think they have? Right up here is a button. Now, we're never going to use this button. And actually, that's sigma. That comes from statistics. That means to add them all up. But I want you to notice something. When you hover your cursor over this sigma auto sum button, notice that in the screen tip it says Alt equals. Alt equals is the keyboard for the auto sum. Of the 450 functions in Excel, only one has a keyboard, the sum function. So let's try it. Alt equals. And sure enough, it puts it right in. Number 1, number 2. This thing right here is called a screen tip. And as we use more and more functions throughout this class, especially the statistical ones, the screen tips will help us complete our formula. Now, sum and average and max and min, those are known as aggregate functions because they calculate a single number from a bunch of numbers. Now, number 1, number 2, that's very common. That means you could put as many arguments. You could actually highlight this column and then another column over here, and it would add them. But for us, we're simply going to take our mouse, click in the first one, drag. When we see our dancing ants going around the correct range, then we hit Enter. And sure enough, that will work. Now, the sum function, it's awesome. Notice here I have another formula, and I'm going to hit F2 to put this in edit mode. You never want to do a formula like this. If you do a formula like this on the test, it's not correct. And the reason why? Well, there's two reasons. One is, obviously, that took a long time to create plus, 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 plus. But the second thing is this. Many times in spreadsheets, people will come, point to the row 5, right-click, insert, and add a new record. So I'm going to put like 50,000 here, or whatever that is. Watch these two formulas. When I hit Enter, only one of them updates. F2, only the one with the range. G2 colon G11. It actually isn't G2 to G11. It's whatever the first one you highlighted to the last one. So that way, when it was looking at G10, as soon as we inserted a new row, it knew to push it down. Whereas this formula, F2, never going to pick up that extra inserted row. Now I'm going to escape and Control Z to get rid of the number and Control Z to get rid of that inserted row. Now, let's look at the average. Now, average, as we'll learn, is called the mean. Add them all up, divide by the count. Now, there's no keyboard, so we're going to type equals AV. And check this out. As soon as you type in E, those are all the alphabetical listings of the built-in functions. ABS is for absolute value. I'm going to type a V. Oh, we get a bunch of average. And we will actually see some of these different averages in this class. But I'm going to type ER. And now, when the function I want is highlighted in blue, I can simply hit Tab. And now in number 1, number 2, it's an aggregate function. It means it's going to look at a bunch of numbers and then make a single answer calculation. Enter. Now, I'm going to come up here and right-click, collapse the ribbon. Now, if I want to count, it depends on the data type. Remember, this is a number. This is text. If I'm only given text, which some of the data sets in our class will only be text, you can't use the count function. And in fact, let's click in cell F11 and type equals COU. And check this out. There's all sorts of counting functions. I'm going to type in N, and now we get just to the count functions. And we want to learn something really important about this drop-down list. It always will give us, when you select either with your mouse or your arrow key, it will select the function in blue, and it will give you a screen tip that gives you a hint at what this does. Counts the number of cells in the range that contain numbers. Down arrow, count counts the number of cells in the range that are not empty. Now, that's important. It really is not empty. Count will count numbers or text. But this is the function we use when we're counting text. Another function, count blank, counts the number of empty cells in a specific range. When would you ever want that? Well, remember we talked about raw data. You might want to count how many missing bits of information there are. Down arrow, count if, and count ifs, we'll see lots of uses for count ifs and count ifs. This counts the number of cells specified by a given set of conditions or criteria. I'm going to up arrow, and I'm going to use count here because I'm going to count the non-empty cells. I want to count how many names there are in this, and Control Enter. That is 9. Now, let's try down here equals count, and I'm going to try the count. Notice it says counts numbers. Tab. What if I were to highlight text? It's not going to work. It gives you 0. Now, I want to use this opportunity to show you how to edit a formula. Don't hit delete and start over. I mean, you could do that, but watch this. F2. As soon as you put an F2, the cursor's at the end. If your cursor's inside, you can click on the argument, and it instantly highlights the whole range. Now, just like highlighting a word in Word, when you highlight it and start typing, it replaces it. It's the same here in Excel. Notice it's highlighted, so as soon as I click and drag, it totally replaces it. That will work. Let me show you a different way. Control Z, I'm back to the wrong formula. Another way to edit your formula is if you point to the edge of the highlighted range. Notice the dancing ants aren't moving, so you can't just click and and highlight it. If I were to click and highlight it, it doesn't do anything, right? It's only when those dancing ants are going that you get to re-edit and continue to select until it's right. But watch this. I'm going to point to the edge. That cursor right there, notice we've been using this cursor. That's the selection cursor. But watch this. I'm going to point to the very edge of the line, that blue line. When I see that arrow, that four-way pointing arrow, that's the move cursor. You can click and move. As long as you don't let go, you just keep dragging it until you get it where you want, and now let go and enter. These are all examples of aggregate functions that look through a bunch of different items and calculate a single number answer. Now, in all of these examples, we did single cell formulas, but now we got to talk about copying formulas. And we have a few examples for this. Now, here's our data set for this example. We have employee and gross pay. And here's our tax rate. And we need to calculate a column of all the deductions. Now, calculating a single cell formula is quite easy. I'm going to click in G27, and I'm going to use the equal sign. That equal sign starts all formulas. And since my cell references are close, I'm going to use left arrow times right arrow, right arrow. I have the gross pay times the tax rate. When I hit Enter, I calculate the correct answer. Now, the next employee, and I have to redo the formula, equals, I'm going to get the gross pay times I-27. Enter. Oh, this is getting tiring. Equals one cell to my left. Notice each time in this column, I'm always looking one cell to my left times I-27. Now, the funny thing about the pattern of this formula, equal sign, one cell to the left times locked on I-27. Every single formula in this column needs to be locked on that I-27. But every new formula needs to adjust and look exactly one cell to my left times I-27. So instead of creating all the formulas by hand, we're going to have to learn the difference between relative and absolute cell references. Now I'm going to highlight all these and use the keyboard shortcut for delete, the delete key. Do not right-click delete in Excel. There's very few situations where you want to do that, because if you do that, and I'm going to do that and make a horrible mistake here, it's going to ask you which direction you want to shift the cells. If I were to just blindly click OK, oh, it literally deleted everything and shifted everything over. Luckily, there's Ctrl Z. So use the keyboard, delete. All right, now I'm going to try this formula again. Equals one cell to my left times locked I-27. Control Enter. We use Control Enter when we want to put something in the cell and immediately do something to the cell. And what I want to do to it is copy it. So I'm going to use a trick here. That little green box in the lower right-hand corner is called the fill handle. This is my selection cursor, right? But watch what happens to my selection cursor when I move it right to the end. You don't want the move cursor. You want the crosshair. That's the crosshair, or I like to call it an angry rabbit. You can click and drag, and that copies your formula. What? What happened there? I'm going to go to the last cell, and this will be a trick. Every time we copy a formula, you got to go check the last one by hitting F2. Well, look at that. Well, the blue one is a relative cell reference. That means every single time we copy, it's looking relative to me, the formula, one cell to my left. But that one, I didn't want it to always look 1, 2 cells to my left. I wanted it locked on I-27. So I'm going to escape and highlight all of these. Delete. Let's try this again. Equals one cell to my left times, but now when I highlight I-27, either with my arrow keys or my mouse, you hit the F4 key. And the F4 key puts the secret symbol in that tells Excel that's no longer a relative cell reference. It's an absolute cell reference. It is forever locked on I-27. In this class, these are the only two types of cell references we're going to use, relative and absolute. There are other types of cell references, but for this class, these are the two cell references we're going to use. And you're not going to believe this. When I Control Enter, now I'm going to take my cursor and point to the fill handle. When I see that angry rabbit, I'm going to click and drag, click in the last cell, and hit F2. That is amazing. What did it do? Relative cell reference. Every single cell is always looking one cell to my left times absolutely I-27. F2, one cell to my left, absolutely I-27. Now the advantage of this is time. You save time. If you have to do every single one by hand, it takes forever. In this class, we will have huge columns of formulas where if we didn't know the difference between relative and absolute, we'd be spending way too much time creating our formulas. When instead we create a single formula, copy it down. Now we want to talk about a few more formulas. And we're going to talk about a parallel example to the one we just did. We're going to do 2 single cell calculations, and then we're going to do 2 column calculations. All right. So here's your score. You got 8.6 on a 10-point quiz. And here's all the rest of the scores for the class. And you want to figure out how well you did, right? Well, you wanted to get 10, but you got 8.6. But what if we took the average, and I'm going to click in cell F38, equals AVER tab, and highlight all of the scores. And I'm going to hit tab to put the formula in the cell and jump to the right, because eventually I'm going to come here and make a calculation. Well, if the average was 6.97 and you had 8.6, did you do above average or below average? Well, you did above average. Now, we could take this one step further. I'm going to make a second formula, equals, and we're going to take your score and subtract the average. Now, later, we'll learn that this is part of the standard deviation calculation. But you take the particular x value, that's you, and subtract the mean. That means the average of all of the numbers. If this number comes out positive, you're above average. If it comes out negative, then you're below average. This particular calculation is called a deviation. From the average or the mean, how far are you above or below? Well, you got 1.6. You're way above, right? Now, in that calculation for standard deviation, we have to get a little tricky here. And I want to illustrate not the concept, because we'll talk about standard deviation later, but just making formulas and the different things that can go into formulas. So if our goal is to square, remember we have to use Shift-6, that's a caret, and do a 2. Now, that 2 is a number hard-coded into a formula. But remember, when you do a square, the 2 is never going to change. So that's an example when you can hard-code a number into the formula. Now, there's another problem here. When I Control Enter, that's not right at all. F2 to put it back into edit mode. Hey, we have to force subtraction to happen before exponents. We know our order of operations, parentheses, exponents, multiplying and dividing left to right, and adding and subtracting left to right. So if this is at the bottom of the math operations, right, subtraction, and we want it to happen before exponents, hey, we just use parentheses. Now it'll calculate fine. Now this calculation later we'll see is deviation squared. 1, 2 single cell formulas. Let's make these calculations through the whole column. I want to do the deviation for the entire class and the deviation squared. All right, so you ready? Equals 1 cell to my left times the average. If I Control Enter, that puts the thing in the cell and keeps the cell selected, and double click and send it down, well, I'm going to have all sorts of trouble. I go to the last, don't worry about trouble. Go to the last cell, hit F2. You're like, oh, the range finder. That's what this rainbow color-coded cell referencing system is called, range finder. You can clearly see that the orange one is not pointing towards the average. So you click Escape. You come back up here, F2. Now we have to lock it. Now, how do you lock? We didn't just create this formula. I don't see the dancing ants. The way you can lock is as long as your cursor's touching somewhere. If I hit it right now, it would lock the wrong one. But somewhere after, before, or anywhere in the middle, as long as the cursor's touching, hit the F4 key. Boom, you've locked it. Control Enter. Now remember, we double-clicked and sent it down. It looks to the left, but it also looks below. So when I double-click, zoom, it replaces all those. Go to the last cell in F2. Now that's the completely wrong calculation. Multiplying, no problem. F2 on the top one, it's subtraction. All right? Control Enter. We're going to use the same concept. Double click and send it down. This will happen a lot. We're making calculations. We make errors. No problem. Excel is easy. F2, edit, change it, copy it down. All right, so that's looking pretty good. I'm going to go to the last cell, F2. That's looking fine. Deviation squared equals, and this is a relative cell reference, 1 to my left, caret 2. We're hard coding that in because it's never going to change. Ctrl Enter, double click and send it down. All right, now we're still talking about formula, so let's go down here. And we want to make a bunch of calculations. We're actually going to do all the calculations for this thing called standard deviation. But we're not worrying about the concepts. We're just worrying about the different types of formula elements that we will see. Now, hey, one of the things we have to do is add up this whole column. Well, we already know that there's a keyboard for this one function, Alt equals. Now, when you Alt equals, it always tries to guess. Our previous example, when we did Alt equal, there weren't any numbers around it, so the dancing ants didn't go off. But here, it kind of got it wrong. I don't want that empty cell. The thing about the dancing ants is as long as they're still dancing, it doesn't matter how many times you try and correct the range. Just when you finally get it right, then you can hit Enter. But be careful when you Alt equals, be sure and look at the dancing ants and make sure they're in the right place. Now, one of the things we're going to have to do often in this class is take the square root. Luckily, there's a function. And so I'm going to type equals square root. And sure enough, returns the square root of a number. So it's SQRT tab. It says a number there. I'm going to click right on the cell with a number and Enter. Hey, it calculated the square root. Now, if we didn't have the square root function, we could use an exponent. And I'm sure you remember from your algebra that we're allowed to take a number and raise it to a fraction. Now, for this particular example, we use the square root. But later in Chapter 3, we'll do geometric mean. And we're going to use exponents that are fraction, taking the second root, third root, fifth root, sixth root, etc. So in this case, we're going to have to build a formula like this. If I hit Ctrl Enter, that's not right. And why? F2. Because the order of operations is going to do exponents before the division left to right, right? So I'm going to come over here and put parentheses to force that fraction. Now, why are we typing the fraction in? Because those numbers are not going to change. The square root is always fraction 1/2. And there we go. We get the same answer. Next, we need to count. And I'm counting numbers, so I'm going to use the count function. Any one of these columns will do. I'm going to highlight this column and Enter. So we get a count of 13. And now the big finale is the final calculation is we actually have to take total deviation squared and divide it by the count. And we're going to have to do the square root of this. So watch this, square root. And just a second ago, we did square root of a number, and we just did a number, right? But I'm going to do a calculation here. Hey, the total deviation squared divided by 13. So here we're seeing we're allowed to do a calculation right in the argument of a function. And Enter. That tells us the standard deviation of the population. The population, because we have all of the quiz scores. Later, we'll talk about the difference between population and sample. Now, all of that was just for us to learn about formulas and formula elements. But that was a lot of steps to calculate standard deviation of the population. And the beauty of Excel, many different things make Excel so amazing. But one of the things is that they have a lot of built-in functions, especially for statistics. So watch this, STDE, and there's a P for population and an S for sample. We have a population, so I hit Tab. And you got to be kidding me. I simply highlight quiz scores and Enter. And it does all of those steps. F2, that function has an algorithm that does all of these steps. That is amazing. All right, we have a couple more things we want to look at with formulas. I'm going to scroll down here. Now, in this last set of data, we have CPA scores. And we're going to calculate total, average, and count. So we use sum, average, and count. Well, we know how to do that. But here we want to pay particular attention to building formulas quickly. Now, let's just see how tall this data set is. I'm going to use the wheel on my mouse, and I'm scrolling down. Oh, man, this is huge. Imagine if you had to click and select and down, 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 down. That just takes way too long. So guess what? We're going to learn the keyboards for selecting. Now, let's just click in the top cell. And the first keyboard we want to learn is how to jump to the bottom of the data set. So you ready? Control down arrow. Now, how did it know to stop there? It knew because it kept going. And the first empty cell it saw, it knew to stop. Watch this. If I have an empty cell, remember we talked about how empty cells can sometimes mess up your data set? I'm going to Control up arrow to go to the top. If our goal is to go to the very bottom of this data set and there's an empty cell, Control down arrow, well, it looks like we got to the bottom, but we didn't quite because Control arrow, or later Control Shift arrow, only goes until it sees an empty cell. Now, I'm going to Control Z to put that back up there, Control up arrow. Now, that's going to help us for navigating. But what we really want is to quickly select for formatting and for getting ranges and formulas. So before we see the keyboard, let me click right here. And before I click on the number 41, I'm going to hold Shift. Boom. That's called the bookends. You start with 1. Before you click on the other side of the bookends, you hold Shift. And it works anywhere. Click. Before I click over here, Shift. Boom. It highlights everything. Click right here. Before I click over here, Shift. Boom. So that is awesome for highlighting a big range. You don't have to click and drag. Now we want to combine. It's Control down arrow to jump. But if we hold Shift, Control Shift down arrow, I love that. That highlights all the way down. That would be perfect from formatting. Control up arrow. But now I want to try it inside a formula. Now, this next trick we're going to combine. Alt equals and Control Shift down arrow. Now, I promise you at your work, if you do this and your boss sees, they'll be like, how did you do that? So you ready? Alt equals is the keyboard for the AutoSum. And you got to be careful. The dancing ants, they're trying to be polite. They're trying to look for the numbers, but it got it totally wrong. Now notice, they programmed Excel. It's dancing ants, which means it's edit mode, and it's highlighted. So you don't even have to hit delete. I just click over here, and now the magic. Control Shift down arrow. Now I'm going to Control Enter to put the formula in the cell and keep the cell selected. Oh, that didn't work at all. I'm going to use my scroll bar to scroll all the way up. Let's try that again. Alt equals, click in the top cell, Control Shift down arrow. If I hit Enter, it doesn't really work either because I can't really see the top. So I want to show you yet another way to enter a formula. We've seen Enter, puts the thing in the cell and goes down. We've seen Tab, puts the formula in the cell and moves to the right. We've also seen Control Enter, which puts the thing in the cell and keeps the cell selected. But now, ready? Now, I'm not even going to delete that. I'm just going to Alt equals, click on the top cell, Control Shift down arrow, and now I'm going to use Shift Enter. Shift Enter puts the thing in the cell and jumps up. Now, you don't have to do that. Just remember Alt equals, Control Shift down arrow, and even if you use Enter, at least remember to use your wheel and scroll up. That is profound. Now let's try it a few more times. Average, Tab, click in the top cell, Control Shift down arrow, Shift Enter. Equals count, counting numbers, Tab, click in the top cell, Control Shift down arrow, Shift Enter. That is amazing. That's an example of keyboards and how to make your job easy. Now we want to talk about a couple more formulas. And they have to do with counting with conditions. Now I want to look through the CPA scores and count how many of these scores are greater than 90. Then we're going to do how many are between 75 and 90. All right, so I'm going to click in cell H74 equals count if. And there's two functions. Count if, that only counts with one condition. Count ifs, that counts with one or more conditions. So I'm pretty much going to use COUNTIFs. Now, COUNTIFs started in Excel 2007 and has existed ever since. And the screen tip is polite. It says criteria range. That means all the numbers. Then it says criteria. That means the actual condition. So I'm going to click on the top cell, Control Shift down arrow. And now I'm going to use yet another keyboard, Control Backspace. Control Backspace jumps back to the active cell. Now, I need to get to the next argument, so I'm going to type a comma and watch the bold. Oh, criteria 1. It's saying, hey, give me the criteria 1. So now I'm going to click. Notice I typed in the comparative operator and the number. Notice the alignment is to the left, so Excel thinks it's text. But it's fine because a comparative operator and a number together are text. That's how you put the criteria into COUNTIFs. And it will tell you only 79 people. And if we did our division, 79 divided by 2,000 whatever, we'd get our proportion or percentage of people that scored above 90 points. Now, the beauty of this is now I can simply say greater than 95, 32, greater than 99. Wow, 8 people. Now, if I type exactly 100, that's just equals 100. Oh, so there's 8 people. Yes, because greater than 99, there's only one number for our range of scores. Greater than 99, that's 100. All right, I'm going to go back to greater than 90. It's kind of convenient. You could also do less than 90. Most people, right? Or greater than or equal to 90. That means it'll pick up the 90 also. So 89. I didn't notice. If I get rid of the equal sign. Yeah, so there's 10 people that got exactly 90. Now, that's a single condition. Now, let's do 2. And in this class, statistics, we will have many examples throughout the chapters where we're counting between an upper and a lower bound. Oftentimes, you got to be careful. If you have a lower and upper bound, in just a moment, you see we have a lower and upper bound. If we weren't careful about where we put the equal sign, you notice the upper is 10 here, but the lower is 10 for the next category. That means we can't put an equal sign in both places, right? So, and we'll see this throughout the class. Sometimes we'll have the equal sign on the bottom. Sometimes it's on the top. There's other times where you're never going to have a problem because these two numbers are different. But when they're the same, you better be careful with your equal signs. All right, it's 2 conditions. So I'm going to use COUNTIFs. Well, I'm going to be using COUNTIFs all the time anywhere. Arrow, arrow, tab, COUNTIFs. We're actually going to have to put the range in twice. There's criteria range 1. Criteria 1. Now, I always remember it says range. That means all of the cells. So I'm going to click in the top cell, Control Shift down arrow, Control Backspace. Control Backspace jumps back to the active cell. Now, my screen tip is trying to be polite. It's not until I type a comma that the next argument is bold. Now, I click on greater than or equal to 75. Comma, criteria range 2. I have to repeat it. Hey, I'm asking 2 questions. I need true and true. The number has to both be greater than or equal to 75 and less than 90. So I'm going to have to enter that criteria range twice. Click in the top cell, Control Shift down arrow, Control Backspace. Comma, and now I'm going to use my arrow key to get criteria range 2. Less than 90. Close parentheses, Control Enter. 412 people were between 75 and 90. Now, our last formula for this sheet here is going to be a formula just like this one, except for 2 things. We're going to have to be able to copy it down an entire column. And check this out. The lower and upper limit for each one of our rows does not have the comparative operator in the cell. Up here, we put the comparative operator and the number in the cell. That's no problem. We can take the lower limit and join a comparative operator inside our formula, and then the upper limit and join the comparative operator right inside our formula. The other thing that's going to be different about this formula is that these formulas we didn't have to copy. But here we're going to have to copy the formula all the way down the column. Now I want to point something out about this label. I created this label here just so when we create a chart, there's a label that is unambiguous. But this label here follows a slightly different convention for comparative operators than we're going to use in our formulas. All this is this is from algebra. That score, that's the variable. It's in the middle. Remember, this is between. We're going to count between an upper and lower. So the score has to be both greater than or equal to 0 and less than 0. But here, the score is in the middle. So that's why the greater than symbol is pointing towards the score here. And the less than symbol is pointing towards the score here. When we do our formula, our comparative operators are always pointing towards the column. Right here, this is a less than. It's pointing towards the column. So when we get greater than or equal to 75, it has to look through here and find numbers that are greater than or equal to 75. For this criteria, it'd have to look through the column and find all the numbers that are less than. And again, this is between criteria or and criteria. Both conditions are going to have to be true. All right, so let's build this awesome formula. Hey, we're going to use countifs. Criteria range 1, we're going to have to use the whole column. So I click on the top cell, Control Shift down arrow. But here we need to lock the cell references. So what do? F4 key, and check that out. F4 key not only jumps back to the active cell, but it puts the dollar signs in to lock the cell reference. We have to lock that because we're copying this down. If we didn't, then that blue box would move as we copy down. We type a comma to get to the next argument. Now, we're going to need greater than or equal to 0. So I type greater than or equal to 0. But that won't work. You have to put the comparative operator in double quotes. Now, this is text inside of a formula. This is the first time we've seen this. And that's not a problem because we saw up here how comparative operator and number, it is considered text. And that's exactly what countifs needs. Now, somehow we have to join that with the lower. So we use Shift 7. That's the join symbol, also known as ampersand. Once we do that, we're allowed to click on the lower number. That's a relative cell reference. So as we copy it down, it'll always move to the new lower. Now check this out. That join symbol means it's going to put both of those things together and create one thing. Watch this. I'm going to click on the screen tip. And I'm going to hit the F9 key to evaluate this and see if that's actually true. Now watch. I'm going to hit F9. Oh, look at that. In double quotes, comparative operator and number, it's exactly what countifs needs for this criteria. Control Z, do not leave that hard-coded in, because if you copy this down right now, every single lower limit would be 0. Now the beauty of this construction is now we have the comparative operator in the formula, but that is free to change as we copy down. Now we need to get to our criteria range 2. We're going to repeat the scores. Click on the top cell, Control Shift down arrow, and F4. Not only does it jump back, but it locks the cell reference, comma. And now we, in double quotes, less than, in double quotes, and join with the upper. That is an amazing formula. Very convenient, because now we can have all of our different upper and lower numbers. Close parentheses. Control Enter. And watch this. I'm going to point to that little fill handle. And when I see my crosshair, I double click and send it down. Wow, look at that. I go to the last cell and hit F2. Look at Range Finder. It got the orange one, the lavender one. That's the lower and upper limit. Comparative operators are still perfect. And the blue ranges over here are locked. Control Enter. We'll see how to create this chart in Chapter 2 in our textbook. Wow, that was a lot about formulas and formula elements. Now our next topic, we want to go over to data analysis sort. Let's come over here and click our arrows to expose some more sheets. We want to talk about data analysis. Now we have a few sheets for data analysis. I'm going to click on the sort. Now, data analysis, the essence is, oh yeah, going from raw data and creating useful information for decision making. Now we're going to look at a few things in a few different tabs for data analysis. I want to click on the Data tab, and I'm going to right-click Uncollapse. And here in the Sort and Filter group, we will use sorting often in this class. We will occasionally use filter. We'll occasionally use text to columns. Now data, right, that makes sense. Tools that deal with data. The other ribbon that we're going to use a lot for data analysis is over on Insert. We're going to see in the next couple sheet tabs, pivot tables and charting. But we're going to stay over here on the data and first look at sorting. Now let's scroll down here. Now sorting is the simplest of all data analysis features. You think we want to organize these smallest to biggest or biggest to smallest? It doesn't seem like data analysis, but it is organizing the raw data in a certain way. If you want to see the biggest one on top and then the next biggest one, boom, that is a simple way of doing data analysis. Now, when you're doing sorting and filtering and pivot tables and all those things, you've got to have a proper data set. Remember, empty cells all the way around, field name at the top. Now, we click in a single cell when we do data analysis and use our features up in the ribbon. It doesn't matter if we're going to sort or filter or pivot tables. So I have a single cell, and it doesn't matter which one. Now I'm going to go up to the sort, and I want to see the smallest one on top, so I hit A to Z. Instantly, wow, lots of zeros. That's pretty bad. And as you scroll down, you can see the scores are sorted. If we do Z to A, that brings the biggest on top. Now, if we have text, we might want to go A to Z. That's, of course, going to bring the first letter C and then the next letter F. If I do Z to A, notice a single cell, and instantly it sorts. Now, sometimes you have multiple columns. Here we want to see all of the Chevys together, but then I also want to see within all the Chevys and then Fords, I want to see the number sorted. Now, this means we have two columns to sort. The trick is if you want your major sort or your final sort, you have to do it last if you're using these buttons. So I simply click in a single cell and check this out just to see that when I sort this column, it actually sorts the entire record. Let's go ahead and highlight one of these records and add some yellow, either here or over on the Home tab, or right-click. I love this mini toolbar. That means if we sort on the amount column and the record is to remain intact, that yellow record will be intact after we sort. So you ready? I'm going to go over to Data. I want the biggest on top, so I'm doing Z to A. Well, the biggest one's on top, but let's just scroll down. Sure enough, that's pretty amazing. Now, did you see what we did? We clicked in a single cell, and instantly, because we were sure to have empty cells all the way around, field names at the top, it knew how to sort this data set. Now I'm going to come over to this column and sort it a second time. Once the first column is sorted, it remains sorted. And when we sort this, you won't believe this. Let's go to A to Z. Instantly, all the Chevys are together. But check this out. We have a second sort from biggest to smallest. So I did Z to A on the first column and then A to Z on the second column. So sorting, pretty convenient. It is, in essence, the most basic type of data analysis. Another basic type of data analysis, let's go over to DA filter. Raw data into useful information. Sometimes we have a big data set, and you're given the task of just looking at some of them. All we want is Lisa E's records only when the sale was greater than 500. Now, I could use sort here, but then I have to go to the middle of the data set and try and find Lisa E and then all the ones that are greater than 500. So check this out. They have a great feature. Wait a second. This is a data analysis feature. Got to check. Do we have field names in the first row? Yes, we do. Do we have empty cells all the way around? Well, I don't know. I better go look. Watch this. I'm going to do a trick. I'm going to Control down arrow. Wow, down to the millionth row. Because we got to the bottom, that means there wasn't anything there in that column. Now watch this. I need to get back up, so I'm going to click one cell over because I know there's a column with stuff up there. Control up arrow. That's pretty amazing. So look, wow, over 7,000 records. Control up arrow. All right, so we have a proper data set. Remember, a single cell for all of our data analysis features, sorting, filtering, pivot tables. So we want to filter, so I click in any cell. Remember, sorting, it kind of mattered because we wanted to tell the column. But here for filter, just go up and boop, instantly we can see our filters. Now, look at this. We go to the drop down. And actually, the filters, since 2007 Excel, are amazing. Now, we're just going to do a basic filter here. We're going to uncheck Select All, scroll down, and say, oh, I only want to see Lisa E. This is one criteria or one condition for filtering the data set. Instantly, I see all of the Lisa E's. Now, how do I know it's filtered? A few ways. Notice there's a filter icon there, whereas here is a drop-down. But the more obvious way to tell is, look, we have sky blue as the color for our row headers. Not only that, but 14, 37, 65, there's lots of missing rows. They're not deleted. They're just hidden. Now we come over. We're going to apply a second condition or criteria. I'm going to come up here, and for each one of the data types, and here we can clearly see there's number. Over here, if we were to click this, we can see there's text. If we were to come over to the date column, oh, look, there's a date filter. Oh, you can't see that. It's off to the side. I'm going to have to right-click, insert. Just for a second, you could see, oh, there's date filters. I'm going to Control Z. All right, let's come over here. The filter senses that this is number, so we're given some special options. Number filter, and you got to be kidding me, equals, does not equal, greater than. That's what we're looking for. If we wanted to find exactly 500, we use greater than or equal to. I'm using greater than. I'm simply going to type in 500. And by the way, this is one of the few dialog boxes where we do not see our collapse button. So we can't attach this number to some criteria or conditions in the cell. All right, I'm going to click OK. And instantly, there's all of Lisa E's records greater than 500. And so for data analysis, we've done something simple. Eliminated all the records we're not interested in. All right, so sorting and filtering, those are two basic types of data analysis. Now let's go over to sheet DA pivot table. I'm going to click my arrow. Raw data into useful information. Well, guess what? The pivot table is the most powerful feature in Excel. And here are the steps we're going to go through. I'm going to come down here. I want to create from this raw data in a proper data set 1, 2, 3 reports. Now, no problem. We could do these with formulas. And formulas have their place. And we'll do both formulas and pivot tables in this class. But you're not going to believe how easy it is to go for this raw data and create 1, 2, 3 reports with a pivot table. The reason it's the most powerful feature is because it does amazing things quickly. Now let's look at the form of these reports. Because one of the tricks to understanding how a pivot table works is looking at what your end report needs to look like. Well, it looks like we need a total for all the dates. If I click in this top cell and Control down arrow, you see there's only 44 records in this small data set. But what did we do? We had to go through and find all of the 1020s and get all of the numbers and then add them up. So really, we're not adding up all the numbers from this column. We're adding up all the numbers given one condition or criteria. So for here in this cell, I'm adding just the dates for 1020. In this cell, just the dates for 1021. So we're adding with one condition. Not only that, the second thing you want to realize is that this is a row. This is a second row in the report. This is a third row. This is a fourth row. Fourth row. Fifth row. And what sits at the front of each row? The actual criteria. So that criteria or condition says which numbers to add. Let's look at this next report. Same idea. We don't want all the numbers from this column. We want just the numbers for Northwest. So manually, I'd have to go Northwest, Northwest, Northwest. Get all of these numbers somehow, and then add them. Doing that manually, you never do. Doing it with a formula, you can do that, and we'll do that in this class. But doing it with a pivot table is just automatic. All right, so that's a calculation with one condition. Here, add up all the southwest. Here, add up all the west. But remember, this is just sitting in a row. The condition or criteria is at the head of the row. Finally, we want to do the same thing for sales rep. Get a unique list of sales rep from this column and add up given one condition. All right, you ready? You're not going to believe this. What's our rule? Proper data set, you got it. Field names at the top, empty cells all the way around, records in rows. Now click in any single cell. The pivot table should be on the data tab because it's the most powerful data analysis feature. But Microsoft put it on the insert pivot table. So I'm going to click boop. Now I want you to tell me, why did it guess right? It guessed right because, yep, I heard it. Yeah, it's a proper data set, and there's empty cells all the way around. So it got that step right. The only thing to this dialog box you need to worry about is, where do you want to put it? On a new sheet? I'm going to put it for this first example here on an existing sheet. Click in location. There's that collapse button. That means you can attach this text box to the cell. So I'm going to click on the title bar. Now I want to click in cell I-22. And since our report is going to be small, it's OK to place it right here next to some other stuff. I'm going to click OK. Now instantly, what shows up? Pivot table fields. So one of the reasons to learn the synonyms, column header, field name, variables, is because if we're in Excel, we need to know that the fields, that's all of these things. Right? In science and the textbook, they say variable. Sometimes people say column headers. But here, we need to know all three of those words. So what is this right here? This is a field list. We have all of our fields. Now remember, we talked about the shape of the report. It looks like the date is going to be in the row area. And it looks like the sales, that came from this column, the sales are going to be down in the values area. And they have that little symbol, sigma. Now pivot tables do not only add. That's the most common calculation, but they do other calculations too. So watch this. You simply take whichever field you want, and I'm going to take date to start off. And just by clicking and dragging. Now, notice it says no, no, no with that icon. No, no, no. But right, oh, I could drop it in the filter. I could drop it in the column. I could drop it in the values. But no, I want my criteria or condition at the head of each row. So I drop it there. You see that? What did it do? The pivot table is just flat out amazing. It went through this whole column and gives me a unique list, also called a distinct list, one of each date. We didn't have to manually do that. The pivot table did it for us. Now we drag sales down to values. Just like that. 3 clicks. So I open up the pivot table, drag, drag, boom. Now, that's not the end because we need to always do a few things. If we're creating useful information, is that a useful name at the top of the date column? No, it's not. Unfortunately, that's the default behavior. So every time we create a pivot table, we're going to have to come up to our pivot table context-sensitive ribbons, go to Design, go over to Report Layout, and you have to show in either outline or tabular. Now, we'll do so many pivot tables in this class, you will have the hang of it after the first or second week. You can pick either one. I'm going to click Outline. Oh, that's much better. Now it says Date, and we see our dates. The next thing is we want to number format this. Now, I'm going to show you the method that allows us to change the function, the name at the top, and the number formatting. And the trick is we right-click in the values area. Right-click. And the one-stop shopping is value field settings. Value because it's the value area. Field because it's a field. Settings because this is where you go to change whatever you want. Click. And here's our dialog box. This is an amazing dialog box. We can type anything we want up there, change the function, and change the number format. Now I'm going to start with a number format. I'm going to go boop. And I'm going to choose currency or accounting because this is dollars. We can show however many decimals, 0, 1, or 2. I'm going to show 0 since there aren't any decimals, and click OK. So it hasn't taken effect yet because we just did our first step. Sum, we want that, but we could count, average, max, min. and other functions. Now I'm going to highlight up here and type total sales and enter. And look at that. There's our first report. Now let's try this again to create our second report. You ready? Click in a single cell. It doesn't matter which one. Don't do this. Don't do this. Don't accidentally select just 2 cells, because then it will think you want just those 2 cells. 1 cell, insert, pivot table. I'm going to say existing, location. Now stacking pivot tables on top of each other like this can be dangerous unless you're never going to move the pivot tables or pivot them. We're simply going to have 3 pivot tables right on top of each other, so it's OK for this example. Click OK. Now what do? We drag and drop. Filter, which we'll see later, column, row, values. We're going to have our region in the rows. Instantly, we get a unique list. We drag sales down to values. Instantly, we get our sum calculation with 1 condition or criteria. We don't like row labels. We go up to design, report layout, tabular or outline. I'm going to do tabular this time. You see, it keeps the lines. Up here, it doesn't keep the lines. Finally, right-click, value field settings. This is the one-stop shopping for value area. I want to keep the sum function. I want to change the number formatting, currency, 2 decimals only. Click OK. I want to come up here, total sales, and enter. Notice the OK button is blue. It's highlighted. That means, actually, any dialog box, when the button is highlighted, that means enter will enact it. So when I hit enter, it takes all of those settings. Now let's do this again. Let's do this in fast speed, because pivot tables are amazing. We don't even have to look through the column and get a unique list. We click in a single cell, insert, pivot table, existing location, location. Click in the cell we want, OK or enter. Drag sales rep down to rows. Instantly a unique list. Sales down to values. Instantly the sum with 1 condition or criteria. We don't like row labels. Design, report layout, show and outline. Right-click the values area. Notice if you right-click here, I don't see value field setting because I'm in the wrong part of the pivot table. Right-click, value field settings, number formatting, currency, no decimals. Click OK. Click OK. I left it sum of sales, but watch this. I can click right there and just type total sales. You can't type sales because sales is the name of one of the field. But I can type total sales and enter. That is amazing. So the pivot table really is a very powerful feature. Now we want to go look at a few more pivot tables and see even more amazing things. DA pivot table 2. Now here's the thing. We're looking at the end result of the report we want. This calculation right here is not done with a single condition or criteria. It's 1, 2. Now what's at the head of the row? Date. What's at the head of the column? Region. That means when we get to our pivot table field list, we're going to drag the region field to the column area, the date field to the row area, and the sales to the values area. Now get this. This is 2 conditions, right? That means we are not adding up all the numbers. We're only adding up for that cell when we find West and the date 1025. So here, as we go through, here's in the region column a West. That means true. This record gets a true for that 1 condition or criteria. For 1025, we found it right there. That means we got true, true. We're now allowed to use that number for adding. You could see there's only 1 of them. For this calculation up here, 1020 in the West. Remember, we had to go through here. We found a West. And we also had to find a 1020. Boom. 2 true, so we're allowed to use that number. We keep running through west 21. No, west on the 20. Those 2 conditions are met, so we're allowed to use that number. But there's more, and we could go all the way through. Here's another west on the 20th, another west on the 20th. So you get all of those numbers by looking through the date, finding 1020, the region, finding west, and then going through and finding the sales and adding them. So we're not adding all of them. In this cell, we're adding with 2 conditions. The key, though, is we don't necessarily have to think of it in that explicit of terms. But we do have to realize that date goes in the row, region goes in the column, sales goes in the value. So you ready? A single cell, insert, pivot table, existing worksheet, location. I'm going to select K14, click OK. Watch this. You drag the date down to rows. Instantly a unique list. Region down to columns. You're kidding me. Look at that. Instantly a unique list across rows and columns. We drag sales down to values. That is amazing. We're not done. Row label, column labels, not useful information. So we go up to Design, Report Layout, Show in Outline or Tabular. I'm going to show in Tabular. Right-click inside of the Value area, Value Field Settings, Number Formatting, Currency, 0 decimals, click OK. We're going to keep the sum calculation. Later, it's totally simple to change it to average or whatever you want. And watch this. I've got to show you a trick here. Sometimes you do want to see sales. But if you type sales, that's the name of the field name. So you're not allowed to do it. And here's the trick. Type a space. A space counts as a character. It means that this is different than the field name. That's just a cool pivot table trick. Click OK. And instantly, look at that. Now, let's come over and do our. Notice the pivot table field list, when I click outside the pivot table, goes away. Sometimes if you accidentally click the close and you're like, hey, how do I get it back? Well, you could look through the context-sensitive ribbons to find it. It's up in Analyze. But I always like to right-click. Right-clicking usually gives you what you want. And sure enough, down at the bottom, Show Field List. Now, this field list is for that pivot table. When I click outside here, it'll come back if I click in there. But now I can come over. I need to create my second pivot table. Sales rep, region, sales. Ready? Insert, pivot table, existing worksheet, location. I'm going to select K23. Click OK. Region down to column. Instantly, we get a unique list. Sales rep down to rows. Instantly, we get what's called a cross-tabulated table. Sales down to values. Wow. Design, report layout, show in outline. Either one, tabular or outline. Right-click, value field settings, number, currency, 0 decimals. OK. I could have hit Enter there too. That is simply amazing. I'm going to click outside. Notice when I click here, it shows me the field names for that pivot table. When I click over here, it shows me the field names for that. When I click outside, it goes away. That is just amazing. So many tables that we do in statistics are cross-tabulated, and that is amazing. Now, I do want to show you something about a pivot table and why it got the name pivot table. So you make this beautiful report. You've done your data analysis. The boss is happy. But then the boss goes, hey, wait a second. I didn't want region across the columns. I wanted it on the rows. Watch this. I'm going to click and drag, and this is why it's called a pivot. I'm going to drag region below sales rep, and instantly it turns into a vertical table. That's why it's called a pivot table. That's also why it's dangerous to put pivot tables next to each other. If we pivoted this table and dragged region down to row area, it would ask us, it would give us a message. Are you sure you want to destroy everything below? But check that out. That is amazing. That's why it's called pivot. Now, if I want to bring sales rep back up to columns, I just click and drag, and instantly I've pivoted the report. I'm going to drag it back. Sales rep and region. That is amazing. Hey, let's go over to our next sheet, Pivot Table 3. Now here, we're given, and this will happen a lot in this class, we have survey data for statistics, right? We ask everyone their preferred COLA or yes or no to a particular question or whatever the survey results might be. We have this huge table here, Control down arrow. So I have well over 500 responses, Control up arrow, and all I want to do is count. We could use formulas and functions. One of the problems is, how do I go? I have to look through this whole list and go and get a unique list of each item. But forget it. The pivot table does that for us. Click in a single cell. Now, we're going to do so many pivot tables. We're going to learn the keyboard. We got to learn, if I go to Insert and hover my cursor, remember for the auto sum there was, in our screen tip, a keyboard. There is no keyboard for the pivot table. So we're going to have to learn what are called Alt keyboards. That's A-L-T. Watch this. My cursor's sitting right there, and when I hit Alt, what happens to my ribbons? That is so cool. It shows me all of these screen tips. So what's the letter for Insert? It's N. Now, Alt keys are succession. I hit Alt, and I let go. Now I'm going to tap N and then let go. Now, I haven't done it yet. Watch this. I'm going to tap N. Instantly, a bunch of new screen tips inside the Insert menu come up. So now it's V. When I hit V, wow. Now, the reason that they designed it, I clicked Escape there. The reason that they designed it that way, Alt, is because Alt keyboards are for you to teach yourself. If you're using Excel, everything all the time on the page layout or formulas, you teach yourself the keyboards. So Alt N V is what we're going to use. So from now on, that's what we're going to use. Alt N V. Now, I want to put it on an existing sheet. So I'm going to click Existing Worksheet, Location. I'm going to put it in G14. Click OK. Now, wait a second. We have only one field. How do we do a pivot table? Watch this. I'm going to drag it down to rows. Instantly a unique list. Drag it down here. Now, remember data types. What kind of data is this over here? It is text. Notice I didn't let go. I grabbed it, but I didn't let go. When I drag it down here, it will automatically count the text items because it knows that it's text. So when I drop it here, instantly I get a count. See, it says count. When the data type is a number, it defaults to sum function. Now, it's easy to change that. We just right-click Value Field Settings. But let's fix this up. Design. I'm actually going to close the pivot table field list. Go up to Design, Report Layout, Show and Outline. Now, I actually don't want to do this. I'm going to click Escape. The reason why is because if I drop the field name right there, it'll be really wide, and I don't want that long field name. So I'm going to do the same trick we learned earlier. I'm just going to type here COLA. And then over here, I'm going to type frequency, count, and enter. Now I can come up between H and I and point. When I see that cursor, I can click and drag to change the column width. All right. Pivot table's pretty amazing. We had a single column of text, and boom, we get a unique list and a count. Now we have one last pivot table we want to look at. I'm going to scroll over and go to Pivot Table 4. Now here we have a data set. Company name, sales rep, customer, zip code, and amount. Control down arrow, so we have about 200 records. Control up arrow. And all I want to do is I want to count, get the max and min or amount for each zip code. So we're going to drag this to the row area, and then we're going to have 1, 2, 3 calculations on the amount. Now notice we don't have a preview here. We're just, after you use pivot tables a while, you get the idea. You can visualize the report in your head and then create it. All right, a single cell, Alt N V. Click Existing, Location, F15, click OK. Now, the trick here is we're going to drag zip code down to rows. Instantly, we get a unique list. But now, since we have 3 calculations on amount, we go drag 1 time, drag 2 times, drag, and it might not have enough room, so you can point to the bottom of your field list and click and drag. Looks like we have plenty of room there. And drag a third time. Now I'm going to close this. Now, just as we did in the last one, I don't want to have customer zip code. I'm just going to type zip and enter. We would want customer zip code if the people reading the report didn't know it was a customer, right? Because we're always trying to create useful information. But this is just for us internally. We know it's zip, so I just put zip. Now we have to come in 1, 2, 3 times, go to our value field settings. Right click, value field settings. First, we're going to change it to count. Now, actually, in the pivot table field list, if you look right there and then scroll down, there's a count number. So actually, count numbers and count are different than the Excel functions. This would be count in the Excel spreadsheet using functions. This would be count. I know that seems kind of strange. Now, either one of them will work, but since I have numbers, I'm definitely going to use count numbers. I do not want any number formatting because counting gives us whole numbers. Click OK. Count, I don't like that, so I'm going to click in the top cell and just type count and enter. Now come over here, right click, value field settings. We want max. I'm going to change the function to max. I'm definitely going to come down and do number formatting. These are dollar amounts. And then I can backspace through here. I don't need to see max of amount to, and enter. Right click, value field settings. This is so amazing. Min, number formatting. We want to indicate that these are in dollars. We can show the unit. Get rid of all that. Just show min and enter. That is pretty amazing. So it looks like, if we're analyzing this, we can clearly see that 98174, we had the most sales, 15. If we were looking at an advertising campaign, we'd see that the zip code, if we were mailing stuff out, that advertising campaign didn't work, or maybe it's some other cause. But that's a pivot table to count, min, and max. All 3 calculations are calculations based on a single condition. So we didn't look through and find the max, the min, and the count of all of them, just some of them based on this criteria or condition in the row area. So pivot tables, we'll use them so many times in this class. Now I'm going to scroll over here. We have 2 more topics. We want to talk about chart. Now we're going to click on the sheet charts. Now, the first thing we have to know, and the most important thing for this class, is charting is 100% new in 2013. If we go over and start clicking on these charts, the dialog boxes, ribbon tabs, and task panes that we use to create our charts are just totally different than earlier versions. So a different version of Excel is not going to work for this class. Now, what is a chart? If we look down here, we have 2 charts. We have a column chart, and we have a bar chart. I'll kind of move it up here to the side. Now, what is it that they do so well? Well, look at down here. Here's all the data. Oh, yeah, raw data. It's just hard to make sense of raw data. But charts take numbers and visually articulates them so you can get a quick impression or see the trends or what's happening. We can clearly see that the yellow bar is the tallest, right? The yellow piece is the biggest. The drop right here for the 22nd of October, that's the lowest. The trend for these scatter plots tends to go up. That's why we do charts. Quick visual impression. Now, I want to briefly go through each chart type. But before we do that, we got to talk about the #1 rule for charting. It's no chart junk. Everything that's in the chart has to help deliver the message. No unnecessary repetition. If you look out there at charts, sometimes even in magazines, professional magazines, you'll see charts that are badly done. We're not going to do that. We're always going to try and articulate our quantitative or number data visually in the most effective and efficient way. Now, columns. Columns are vertical. Bars are horizontal. Now, there's a big problem. The textbook, they always call this a bar chart. Now that's fine. But in Excel, we have to know whether to pick the column, because it says column, or the bar. That's called bar. So columns are vertical. Columns hold up Greek architecture, right? This is a bar. It's horizontal. Now, what do columns and bar do? Well, they do the same thing. They show some amounts over a set of categories. Now, the difference between these two is that sometimes the bar chart, the horizontal, will show the differences more forcefully. So if you're trying to emphasize the difference, there it is. You could see that the difference is not as much here, but with the horizontal, it tends to show it more forcefully. The other thing is sometimes if you have really long labels, showing a bar shows the long label. See here, we don't have much room to show our label. So showing amounts across categories. Well, look, the pie chart is an alternative. And I want to bring this up here and show you something. The pie chart shows us the same data here. And actually, in recent years, the column chart tends to be the preferred chart over bar and pies. The thing about the pie chart is sometimes it's harder to distinguish the differences in sizes. Now here we happen to have a big pie slice. But with columns and bars, it's almost always easier to see the differences. So in some ways, pie charts have fallen out of favor when it comes to visually articulating quantitative data. Now they still look great. And in some cases, when you have percentages, it's the perfect chart. Another chart is the line chart. And I want to show the line and the XY scatter next to each other. Because here's a big mistake. Sometimes people will try and use line charts to articulate XY data. Here's the rule. A line chart shows one number on the vertical axis. An XY chart shows two numbers. You go out or along the x-axis a certain distance, and then up or down a certain distance on the y-axis. There are two numbers that determine that point right there, or that one right there. You can see that little point right there. That's 5 hours spent studying, 61 score on the final. Whereas here, that point right there, it's just however high that is. These are categories, equidistance on the horizontal axis. There's only one number here. Hey, the line chart, the XY scatter. What does the line chart do? It shows trends or patterns over time or categories. Many times we see time here because it really shows way down on the 22nd, way up on the 24th. So we much more quickly can see boom, boom pattern given this line chart. XY scatter, we will see many times in many chapters where we have XY scatter data, and it shows the dots. We look to see if there's a trend. Is the trend tend to be up or tend to be down, or is there really not a pattern? Now, in this particular example, we have hours studied, independent variable, score on your final, dependent variable. It kind of depends how many hours you study on what your final score is going to be. So here, it tends to look like the more you study, the higher your score is going to be. Well, we have lots of chapters in the textbook about this, but here we're just pointing out what that chart does. Now, I want to create a couple charts here. Now, the first chart we want to create is that column chart. But look at this. This is raw data. We actually need to create a pivot table first, and then from the pivot table, make our chart. But you're not going to believe this. There's so many amazing new things in Excel 2013. And one of them is, let's go look. Insert. And in the chart group, recommended charts. If you click this, you do have to be careful. There's some charts you don't want. But look at this one. When I click through and I find sum of sales by sales rep, you're not going to believe this. That recommended chart, only in 2013 and later, it builds the pivot table for you, and then will build this chart from the pivot table. Now, when you use this, it's going to automatically create it on a new sheet, which will be fine. You can see that little icon for a pivot table there. Now I'm going to click OK, and we'll go to a new sheet. I immediately want to name this sheet. I'm going to double click and call this Chart Practice and Enter. Now I don't need this field list, so I'm going to close that. There's the pivot table. There's the chart. Now we do want to fix this chart up so it articulates our message. All we want is the height of the columns with the numbers on top. Now the first thing is these gray areas, these are fields, and they're great. You can use them to filter, just like in your pivot table, but I'm going to right-click, hide all field buttons. The next thing is there's different elements in the chart. Chart title, the axis with numbers, the axis, the horizontal with our categories, the column heights, grid lines. Now I'd like to start with the columns, and I'd like to right-click. And notice it says Format Data Series. Now I want to show you the trend for chart elements. If I right-click the title, oh, it says Format Chart Title. Right-click the axis, Format Axis. So each one of the elements, if you right-click, will allow you to do formatting. But let's select the columns. And when we select the columns, you want to make sure they're all selected. If you select just one and then select it again, you see it's like a slow double click. Only the one column is selected. That means you can format just that. That's not what I want. I want to click back out here. Now select, and they're all selected. Now we could right click, but every one of the elements, all you have to do to format them is use the keyboard Ctrl 1, and immediately our task pane opens up. This is brand new in 2013. They used to show up in a dialog box, but now it's in a task pane. Now what they did is they make icons. This is the fill button. This is the effects. This has options like gap width for the column. So you're expected to know what the icons mean. Now for me, I'm still kind of learning them, so I oftentimes have to click through to find what I want. But these icons are going to be the trick. Fill, there's a great option, vary colors by point, and instantly the columns have different colors. Now we want to do some more formatting. One thing I want to do is I don't want these grid lines, so I select, and you want to make sure not to select the outside when it's solid. You want the inside lines with the little boop, 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 the little bubbles, and then delete key to delete them. Sum of sales by sales rep, that is a fine chart title. I'm going to come over to the axis. I want to actually format this. Whoa, wait a second. Remember, if I come over to the pivot table and right-click, value field settings, I can change the value field settings number formatting, currency, something like boop, boop, click OK, and that'll actually flow through to the chart. If we were to select the axis and then scroll down, it says, and sometimes these task panes really, you have to go way down, but down here under number, oh, I click the arrow and it didn't show me, but this gap appeared here. Now I'm going to drag this down. You can see it says link to source. You can totally customize your number formatting here also. Now task panes are new in 2013, but also we have some options here right next to the chart. Now notice if I click over here, printing it out or anything like that, it doesn't show up. But as soon as you click on the chart, they expect that you're going to do something like edit it or change it. Now, let's look at here, because this is chart elements, and this is actually a good feature in 2013. If I click it, we can add things like data labels, or later when we do error bars in linear regression. So we can add things. And what they did, the idea in 2013 is they added, these things used to be up in the ribbons, but now it's closer right to the chart, so you don't have to go as far. Now I'm going to click on data labels. Boom. Now I'm going to click over in the chart. This thing doesn't go away sometimes, so now I'm going to click Escape. Now my question, is there any chart junk in this chart? Well, yes, there's some unnecessary repetition. If I have the numbers here, I probably don't need them here. So I'm going to click on the axis and use the delete key. All right, so that chart's looking pretty good. Now, I want to change the size, so I'm going to put it right to the corner. And when I see my diagonal arrow, I'm going to click and drag in. Now I want to do three things we talked about: column, bar, and pie. So I want to cheat actually, this is a great trick. I want to copy this. Now, you want to make sure that you're not selecting something inside the chart, but you want to make sure it's the outside and the outside edge is selected. And then we're going to copy Control C, and now I'm going to paste down below Control V. Right click, collapse ribbon. And now I want to change this to a bar. And this is a great trick. You might have the same data but multiple charts. Now we could go up to Design and change chart type, or we can simply right click inside of our chart and say Change Chart Type. And just like that, this pops up. I'm going to come down to Bar, none of this three-dimensional chart junk, just the flat one, and click OK. There's that, emphasizing the differences. Oh, that's very nice. Now, I'd like to kind of make the gap width between these bars smaller. So now I'm going to select. Now, we're going to have to find where the gap width is. And again, you might have to click, click, click. But this has to do with the actual bar. So I'm going to click here, and sure enough, gap width. Now, one thing you do not want to do with this categorical data, this is text data, word data, is you don't want to touch the columns. We need some distance between them. And in Chapter 2, we'll see the difference between discrete and continuous data. So if we had categories here like 0 to 10, 10 to 20, then the columns could touch. So when we have words or text as our labels, we don't want the columns to touch. But I kind of like it a little bit less gap width. All right, now one more thing. I want to copy this chart again. I'm going to make sure the outside is selected, Control C, and over here I'm going to Control V. And now right click, change chart type. I'm going to change it to a pie, flat one. Most horrendous violation of 3D is pie charts, because when you tilt a pie on its side, you distort the proportions. So really, you don't want to ever use a 3D pie. Our flat pie is just fine. I'm going to click OK. Now, one nice thing about the pie, unlike some of the other charts, is when we click in our pie and scroll over a little bit, this plus, we can come to data labels, and there's an arrow. We click on that arrow, and it will open up more options. Now, the more options will appear over here. Golly, that didn't work. So I'm going to have to start clicking up here. I'm going to click on the actual columns, even though they're pie pieces. Go down to Label Options. And we can click percentage, and it will calculate the percentage for us. So that's actually kind of cool. Pie, bar, column. Let's go back over to our charts, and we want to look at the line and the scatter plot. Now, if we have this data set and we were to go up to Insert, Recommended Charts, the line chart is not going to be there. So this is an example where we're going to have to create a pivot table from scratch, but no problem. We know how easy it is. Existing worksheet location. I'm going to put it right in F53. Click OK. Now I'm going to drag date down to rows, sales down to values, close the pivot table list, design, report layout, show in tabular. Now I can click in a single cell, go up to Insert, and we want line. We have one number that we're going to show on the vertical axis. So I'm going to click boop with markers. Chart junk, so I delete. Click on the total chart title. That's chart junk. I click up in the formula bar. I type an equal sign. I click on the cell A50. I can see my formula. Check that out. It's polite. It says, hey, I got the A50 from the sheet called Charts. There's the sheet name right there. Now I hit Enter to put that formula right into the chart title. Right click, hide all field buttons. Maybe we'll select the grid lines and delete. Click on the axis. Come over to the column. Oh, yeah, you might have to click through for this one. I'm going to click Number, drop down, Currency, and I'm definitely going to select 0 decimals, Tab. All right, so that's a basic line chart, and it shows us some trend over time. Very quickly looking at this, we know the 22nd is the smallest. Now I'm going to point to the corner and click and drag. And moving charts is tricky. Again, just like when copying, you don't want to click on anything inside. You always want to click to the outside edge. That cursor right there is the move cursor. I'm going to move it right. Now I'm going to scroll down a bit, and we're going to do our last chart. X, Y. These are from a sample from class, self-reported how many hours were studied, and the final score. So we want to plot this X, Y, a bunch of little markers or dots on our chart, and see if there is an apparent relationship. Now, the important thing about X, Y is that the X comes first. It's always to the left, and then the Y. Later, we'll see you can even have multiple Ys. I click in a single cell, insert, and there's the scatter chart. Don't click line. Boop. For sample data or collected raw data, we use our markers. If we have a model, like a fixed cost accounting model, we'd use this. But to use a line on collected sample data is not meaningful. So I'm going to select this first one. And there it is, the basic chart. Now, there's a big problem with this. If you were to look at these numbers, right, I have no idea what they are. So this is a case where you have to label. Right? This came with not enough stuff. We're not so much worried about chart junk. Hey, here's that plus. This is really cool. Now in 2013, we just check, and there it is. Now we're going to do the same trick because it's not linked. So I'm going to, with the solid line, come up to the formula bar, equal sign. This is Y. So I click on that and enter. There's the formula, enter. Click on the axis title. In the formula bar, equal sign, click on the X. The horizontal is always X. And now we hit Enter. Click on the title up in the formula bar, equal sign, and A76. I already created a nice label for our chart. Now, I kind of like the grid lines. It helps us pinpoint things. One last thing, right-click one of the dots. Add trend line. And later in chapter 12 and 13, we'll see how amazing this is. Linear, it actually did a bunch of heavy lifting statistics to estimate that line. We come down, scroll, and I'm going to say display the equation in R squared. We'll talk all about that later in our class. That is profound. Now, we wouldn't want to use these numbers in calculations. Later, we'll see how to use functions to look at our actual data inputs and calculate all these numbers. But for visually portraying our quantitative data, that is simply amazing. So charts, really important for our class. Now we have one last topic. I'm going to use my arrow to scroll over, and we're going to go to the sheet number formatting. And what we want to talk about is number formatting. The first thing is, if we have some sales that we need to enter. Watch this. I'm going to enter $13.25, enter. $10.00, enter. $34.10, enter. $54.00, enter. Now what we did there is we entered the dollar sign and the decimals by hand. We do not need to do that. Let's see how to do this a much more efficient way and learn one of the awesome features of number formatting. In this cell, I'm going to start in the top, 13.25. Notice I have to put the 0.25. But when I hit Enter, I only have to enter a 10 here because I'm going to let number formatting do the rest. Now down here, I have to type 34.1, but I'll get that extra 0 and the dollar sign from the number formatting. And down here, look at this. I'm going to type 2 characters. And now what do? I highlight. And up in the home ribbon, number group, I click the drop down, and I can either choose currency or accounting. I'm going to choose currency. Currency actually has the dollar sign floating close to the number. But notice, it put those dollar signs in. And I didn't have to type the 0.00. So here, when I type 10 and 54, I avoided 4 extra clicks. Now I want to show you just briefly the difference between accounting and currency. Accounting puts the dollar sign fixed on the outside. Currency has a floating dollar sign. There's some other differences, but for this class, we don't need to worry so much. Now, I want to click in cell C10 and look up in the formula bar. 10. That's all that's stored there. Right here, well, there's a 13.25 because we need all those digits. But here, 54. Here, there's just a 3, 4 point, and a 1. All the rest is number formatting. That dollar sign is not in the cell. It's on the surface of the cell. It's a facade. Not only that, but how many characters do we have to type here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What got put in the cell? Even though we typed 6 things, only 2 things got put in the cell. So don't ever do it. It takes too long. We want to do things quickly. Now, if we were to add these up, watch this. This is a cool trick. Alt equals, and it does both of them instantly. So the first thing is we love number formatting because it helps us save time typing. But here's another problem. I'm going to highlight both of these cells. Alt equals is the keyboard for AutoSum. Now, wait a second. 13 plus 36 plus 97 equals 145 here, but 146 over here? What's going on? Well, number formatting is a facade. So what happened, it looks like if we were to highlight all these and go up to home and increase the decimals, it looks like someone decreased the decimals. Now, let's reverse. I'm going to Control Z in a second and reverse that and see. But notice, we were totally fooled by number formatting. Really, what's in this cell right here is 12.15. But what happens when we decrease the decimals? It just looks like there's a 13 there. You could flat out look up to the formula bar now and see that it's 12.5. Now, I'm going to Control Z, 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 Z. Here, I see a 13, but up here's a 12.5. Here, I see a 13, and there is a 13 in the cell. You got to realize that number formatting is a facade. Sometimes what you see on the surface of the spreadsheet is not actually what's in the cell. And it can cause problems with our formulas. That formula does not see the number formatting. If it did, it would get 13 plus 36 plus 97 is 146. What that formula sees, if I increase the decimals here, that sum function sees all of these numbers, including the decimals, adds them up. And then when we disguise the number by decreasing the decimals, it just looks like it's 145. That's just number formatting on the surface of the spreadsheet, hiding the decimals. Now, one way to tell for sure, and when I get into trouble with number formatting, I highlight them all, and I go up to the number group on the home ribbon and apply the general. The general number formatting is the eraser. It wipes away all the number formatting. And there you can clearly see, boom, Control Z. Now we want to look at a few more examples of number formatting. Here's a well-known problem. You want to make a formula equals the 100 times the tax rate of 10%. Control Enter. As soon as you see 9.75, you know there's a problem. I'm immediately going to suspect number formatting. I could increase the decimal. And sure enough, someone decreased the decimals so it looked like 10%. I'm going to Control ZZ. If I click in the cell, I can see up in the formula bar 9.75. So really, the solution to this is to increase the decimals. Don't make the spreadsheet misleading. Here's another problem. I'm going to type 0.1, and notice I'm not going to type the lead 0. It's actually got general number formatting. If I needed to see the decimal, I would increase it. But watch this. Here's what you should do. If you enter the decimal, then you're allowed to come up and add percentage number formatting. Now, if you use the drop down here, it shows 2 decimals. If you use that one right there, it shows 0. And notice the screen tip doesn't prompt you. It doesn't say, I'm going to show 0 decimals. So I like to use the drop down here and say percentage 2 decimals. Now we can make some calculation like equals $100 times 10% and Control Enter. Here's a big mistake that happens often. Don't enter the whole number 10 and then try to go up to home, and I should right click, uncollapse this, and apply the formatting percentage, because what does it do? You can already see the preview there. It obeys. When you apply a number formatting, it actually slides the decimal and adds the percent symbol. That's facade. Underneath is the number 10. So don't add a 10 and then add a number formatting like percentage. Really, and I'm going to go and apply general and then delete. You either want to enter the decimal and then the number formatting for percentage, or you want to format as you type. Now, for one percentage like this, it's OK to type in some extra decimals, right? With our currency example above, when we're entering lots of data, you don't want to do that. But when I enter 10.00%, the actual number 0.1 will go into the cell because I'm formatting as I type. Now, I could prove this to myself. If I look up into the formula bar, see, I see 10%. I don't see the actual decimal. But the actual decimal is what's in the cell, not that percentage. So watch this. I'm going to go up and prove it to myself. You saw me. I typed all of those decimals, 10.00%. But if you go back, because what we did was add percentage number formatting as we type. So if we go back and apply general, oh, it wipes it away. Control Z, and then our formula equals $100 times 10% tax rate will work. A couple more examples. This is straight from Chapter 2 in our textbook, and it has to do with number formatting. We will see how to count from a data set, count the number, and then calculate relative frequency. That's just going to be 8 divided by 40 is 0.2. 6 divided by 40 is 0.15. But the textbook is going to show you this crazy thing. They want you to calculate percent frequency. If I hit F2, they multiply that times 100. Now, there may be some arcane examples where you should still do it this way. But the problem with this is it leads to error. And I'll show you the error in just a second. What you really need to do is simply point your formula over there and then add percentage number formatting. Now, we'll look at this example again in Chapter 2, but I just want to show you why this is not a very good idea. We see the percentage, and as someone who has helped solve spreadsheet errors for decades, I know this is a mistake waiting to happen, because people will come down and they will think, oh, OK, I have a sample of 500 students, and the COLA that I want to estimate from these percentages here, I'm actually going to scroll out so we can see this, is I want to estimate how many people from the sample will drink Bloxy Cola. So I'm going to say equals 500 times the percent for Bloxy Cola. And instantly you get the wrong answer. The correct way to do this is to say 500 times our percent frequency. Based on our past data, we estimated that 27.5% of the people will drink Bloxy Cola. So when we take a sample, Control Enter, we're going to estimate that 137.5 people will drink. Now we could prove this. Equals the amount we just estimated divided by the 500 and add our number formatting. And that's the correct percentage. All right, so we'll see this example again in Chapter 2. Let's go down and look at one last number formatting example. Now, here we have some amounts for each month, and I want to calculate the percentage change. I'm going to calculate, hey, give me the end amount divided by the begin amount and subtract 1. Control Enter. And what do we get? We get 8 pennies. That's just number formatting. Don't forget, the formula looks at the underlying numbers and calculates correctly. What we see on the surface of the spreadsheet can be incorrect sometimes. So our job in this case is to simply come up and wipe it away with the general. Or if you want to show it as a percentage, you could add the correct number formatting. Now we can copy this down. Notice there was lots of extraneous decimals there. This number formatting doesn't hack those decimals off. It just displays only 2 decimals. Now that formula right there, we're going to end this video by we're going to click on the sheet, change, increase, decrease sheet tab. Now here we want to talk about 2 different formulas for calculating the percentage change. Here we have sales amount for each year, 12, 13, 14, and we need to figure out the percentage change from 12 to 13. The long formula is this, equals open parentheses, and you take the end amount and you subtract the begin amount. Close parentheses, that becomes the numerator. That's the change, the difference between the two. And you divide it by the begin amount. Now when we Control Enter, we get a decimal. We could format that if we want, but I'm just going to double click and send that down. Go to the last cell, hit F2. Clearly we can see our formula is working. But that formula involves typing 7 things. And we're going to look at a little bit shorter formula. And here's the formula, equals, well, we're going to take the end amount and divide it directly by the begin amount and then subtract 1. I had to type 5 characters. Control Enter, double click and send it down. You'll get exactly the same formula. Here's the reason that that formula will work. If we take end and subtract beginning and divide by begin, well, this is adding or subtracting in the numerator, so we can actually break it apart and slap the denominator into both fractions. So this minus this is the same as that. Oh, but what's anything divided by itself? It's 1. That's why n divided begin minus 1 is perfectly all right. Now, if you wanted to add some formatting, you certainly could. That's the way we can do it. Later when we do relative frequency and then a column for percentage frequency, we'll just have the formula. Look over there. I already pre-formatted this as a percent. Now let's just use that same formula we just did. It took us 7 keys for that longer formula and 5 keys for the shorter formula. So if this is the end amount, I want to figure out the percentage decrease. So I'm going to take, hey, the end divided by the begin minus 1. Control Enter. 0.3, if I added a percentage number format, it'd be like 30% faster. So I like that formula right there. That was a percentage change formula, and it will work for a percentage change up or down. Now, increase or decrease. There's 2 ways we could do this. Now, here's the starting amount, our investment at the beginning of the year, and here's the percentage change. One way to do this is to say, hey, equals the full amount, and then we're going to add the change, which is the full original amount we started with times whatever the change is. Now, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different things we have to do. Put into our formula, Control Enter, double click and send it down. But there's actually a formula that is more common, especially in finance, and we'll see it in this class. Now let's just look at how we could derive this formula. We want to get the end amount, so we took begin plus begin times a percentage change. Now we can notice that begin plus begin times something. Well, we could rewrite this. Begin times 1, well, that's the same as begin plus begin times percentage change. As soon as we get 2 things added together, and there's a common factor here, you can factor it out. And so begins on the outside, and then you, in parentheses, you're left with the 1 plus the percentage change. This formula is a world-famous formula for calculating an end investment amount. So I'm going to say equals the begin amount times, in parentheses, 1 plus the percentage change, close parentheses. Now I have to do a little bit more typing there. But this formula is so common that we need, when we need to be able to, when we see this formula for getting the end amount, we just need to recognize that it is true and valid. Control Enter and double click and send it down. Wow, that was an epic first video for this class, all about an introduction to Excel. Now this is the only chapter where there's not going to be any homework in the textbook. So If you click over on homework 1, it describes what you should do at the top, and then here's the problem, and you do your problem on the sheet. Now, because these are homework problems I'm providing you, I also give you the solution, but don't go look until you finish the problem, just to show you there's a potential solution there. But here's problem number 2. Here's problem number 3. I'm going to use Control Page Down. You can see that there's a bunch of homework problems all the way to problem number 9. All right, that was an amazing first video for this class. We'll see you next video.